So here we are meeting today to have a conversation about the body and why it's important to tune into the body and the body's wisdom to help us heal from past traumas or past events that maybe we're still hanging on to or still impacting our life in some way. And so we are just going to dive into that. Did you want to introduce yourself first,
Like,
Becca?
just the little one was trying to be part of our gathering today.
Awesome.
He was getting tangled up in all my cords here.
I
So sorry for that.
love it when they show up.
I know. He's my little healer, our little puppy that's always with us. So, I think it's a perfect even way to intro in with just the energy of healing of our body, of our consciousness. I'm just so excited to have this conversation today with you, Kristen, because I just value your knowledge so much, all of your work with the somatic work, working with fascia in the body. My gift, hopefully, to bring to this conversation today is I'm a clinical hypnotherapist and evolutionary galactic astrologer. I really just love being able to tap into the deepest places within others of where they get to really learn their own divine blueprint, and that we do all have our own owner's manual. So a lot of my work has revolved around specializing in working with trauma release, blueprint repatterning, self-empowerment. And I've been doing this for over 20 years now already. Oh my gosh. Just working with soul coaching, hypnotherapy, QHHT has been such a profound tool. Human design, quantum astrology, evolutionary astrology, just all these fun tools that really allow us to dive deep into our subconscious. So I'm excited to get to just add to the toolbox of our conversation today and see where this goes.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited too. And how we met was I was actually a client of yours when I was going through my own kind of midlife transition from working in healthcare to doing what I do now. You were like the key person really to help me kind of release some of the stuff that was maybe holding me back and helping me step into being able to speak my truth more and being able to work in the spiritual world and talk about consciousness publicly out in the world and do this kind of healing work. So just to share with everybody, my background is actually in kinesiology. I worked in healthcare for over 15 years doing work with people with chronic disease. So working in chronic disease management. And working in our traditional healthcare system, I was feeling a little bit held back in how deeply I was able to connect with the patients that I was working with to really get down to like the root causes of what has led them to a place of illness in their life or just not being able to like really thrive, right? And so I am a Gemini, if we're talking astrology. So I'm like endlessly curious to learn. So I went and I dove into a form of psychotherapy or somatic psychotherapy called Hakomi. So I studied Hakomi for 2 years. And that's really where a lot of this kind of wisdom from the body and being able to tune into the body, where those tools come from. But also studying trauma-informed yoga, which, talks a lot more about like the chakras and our energy centers and how we can kind of combine Hakomi into that. I've done a little bit of that work with some folks, and that can be really interesting as well. Myofascial release therapy is another place I've gone where I do believe that a lot of our consciousness is connected to the fascia in our body as well. And there's opportunities for healing there. So I'm really excited to have our conversation today and to just dive in and see where it takes us.
Oh, me too. And I do have to say there is just something that really lights up in me, really from some of our conversations together, where you started to really introduce the crystallization that happens within our fascia. And so I'd love to dive in because our conversation today is definitely in regards to health. I think that's something that's very common to anybody walking around in a human body and in any really kind of body. It's like when we are healthy, life is better. Life has more potential to it for expression. But honestly, it's like a lot of times we don't realize how healthy we are until something doesn't feel healthy a little bit. And, something so simple, that we all have experienced, say like a toothache or like muscle pain, if we've exerted ourselves, can literally start to create stress that then translates to discordant emotions, feeling more depressed, more lethargic towards life, or even defeated sometimes with certain of these things, or helpless, hopeless. Yeah. So I want to just step into, within this energy of things such as trauma and stress. I'd like to just start out right away from a evolutionary or from an evolved consciousness. If we are taking a spiritualized path, why do you think it's so important to deal with things that have happened in the past or things that have become stuck in our body?
I love that question. And I think first, maybe it's important too, to just define like what is trauma and what are we talking about when we talk about trauma? Because I know that a lot of times when folks think of trauma, they think of like what we would call the big T traumas. So things like sexual trauma or physical abuse, emotional abuse, being in a war or different things like that we would say that's a big traumatic event to go through. It's also important, and where I focus a lot of my work on too, is the little T traumas, because they don't necessarily get enough credit, and we don't speak about them a lot, because historically in the past, because I think we've been living in this survival mode for so long, we've learned to think, well, unless you're having a big T trauma, it's nothing to worry about, right? And so we don't speak to the smaller T traumas. And those are more the developmental traumas that we go through, as children in our neural development, our brain development. And as we are born as spiritual beings, how our different chakra system even can get shut down at different times of our development, so that those centers aren't as open and we're not shining our light out into the world when we don't get our needs met. And oftentimes we think about our needs being met as our physical needs, right? So we have our physical needs as far as our having enough food, having shelter, having water, having clothes on our back, right? But innately, as children, we need to attach to our caregivers in order to get those physical needs met. And so we'll go out of our way, our little brains that are just so vulnerable when we're younger, just start to create their own ways of creating attachment with our caregivers in order to be able to get those physical needs met. And so if we go to the next level where our emotional needs get to be met, that's often where those little T traumas come in. Can be as something as simple as reaching out for a hug and being pushed away, or as a little child, just experimenting. And, if we think of the sacral chakra, like being creative, a kid that goes and writes or draws crayons on the wall, but then they get yelled at and get in trouble. But that little 2-year-old, they were just trying to express their creativity, right? So these little T traumas can add up over time as well and cause us to create different beliefs that aren't true and don't serve us in adulthood anymore, which maybe served us when we were young. So it can be beliefs and it can be behavioral patterns as well, where we're just unconsciously trying to get our needs met still in adulthood, just because we didn't learn maybe a healthy way to get them met when we were younger.
And so this definitely, as you're describing this, I can definitely remember things within my own childhood of, like getting sometimes disciplined or little things that, for the most part are not necessarily, again, like you're saying, a big T or a big trauma in life that we would think of, but they are these significant moments to where our consciousness is actually perceiving it is something massive. And I'm just not recognizing in myself something that my body does. And I think this might be a way to describe how do some of these emotions even get trapped in the fascia, is this idea of even kind of imagine getting in trouble of, there is, a way in which a lot of these emotions and moments in time basically get stuck in the body when we reach into a state of tension. So it's now constricting within our physicality of our body, not only the muscle tissues, but then it restricts the fascia. So this restriction many times will have stress hormone responses, which start to dehydrate the body, which start to then, lock these traumas into place within these moments. And, as we even get to see this, I can start to see in a lot of ways how it's little things over time that really can build up to pretty significant things that we might deal with later on in life. Is it something that you noticed quite a bit, say, working with a lot of your clients, like your clients and your patients?
Yeah, working in healthcare, that was definitely why I decided to go down this route of, what is the root cause of illness and just plain unhappiness, like not living a life where we're thriving and feeling fulfilled. And so exactly what you're saying, Becca, is those little T traumas that add up over time, we start to create posture around it. And so the example you gave was great. Often we think that we have poor posture because we're sitting at desks all day, and that can certainly be part of it. But I think that is a really great example to use, is that so many people feel like they have to protect their hearts, right? Because to live in the world with our hearts wide open and to be vulnerable, it can be a dangerous place, or perceived as a dangerous place for a lot of folks, especially depending on what you're on the receiving end of when your heart was wide open as a child, right? And so every time, what we do instinctively just to protect our hearts is we pull in our energy. And like you said, that can be something that we can start to play with in healing work, is how are we holding our posture and where are those fascia restrictions? And there's different ways that we can go about healing that. But just to build on what you were saying, when we pull in, the fascia does start to get restricted and it gets dehydrated. How I like to describe it, it's like a sponge. So when we squeeze a sponge and we're holding that sponge tight, the nutrients, the hydration that needs to get into the sponge can't actually be absorbed into the tissue. So that fascia tissue isn't getting the nutrients that it needs to feed the cells in the body. And so when the cells aren't getting the nutrients they need, we can start to lay down disease in those cells because they're lacking nourishment, right? And so we can look at it that way. And the healing work that we do from there can be physical myofascial release, where we actually go in and physically release the fascia, which then can, sometimes as we're releasing fascia, we'll release the emotion attached to the holding pattern as well. So the fascia release work can work, but we can also approach it from a different perspective of Hakomi as well. And that is just kind of going into the body and tuning in and taking people through a felt experience of what they missed, where it got trapped. And that probably leads into how do we trap emotions in the body, or how do we trap those experiences?
Gosh, my whole neurons are just firing right now, because there's just this beautiful visualization. As you were just even saying how when it's like a sponge and we start to restrict, and it's like this whole energy where all of a sudden now all of the cells and all of the tissues are not now receiving, say, the blood flow or the nutrients that they need. Immediately, it was like this huge aha of how that would also overemphasize the emotional belief from the consciousness of the cells in the body of, I'm not having my needs met. I don't deserve, I don't receive.
Wow. Let's just sit with that for a second. That was huge, actually.
This really is tying into the consciousness of the body.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a whole universe that exists inside of our bodies as well. And that touches you, Becca.
Hmm. Yeah, you had said that one thing, and I just felt a whole lot of even emotional release in there of going like, oh my gosh, how deeply we sometimes still hold on to these limiting beliefs of I'm not good enough, I don't deserve to have what other people have, or I don't get what I need, or even maybe how it translates to how we are constantly hungry, not just for food, but for stimulation, connection, being received, being honored, or being noticed in this reality.
Love and connection, right? And just, when we're speaking of the heart, I worked in cardiac rehab for a long time. And how beautiful would it be in cardiac rehab if we actually talked more about nourishing our hearts and self-love and self-compassion as a part of our rehab? It's usually more about the physical, getting on the treadmill and going for a walk and physically repairing the heart and, getting on medications, but just tapping into, there's a beautiful metaphor there is if we're not getting enough oxygen to the heart, we're not getting enough love, enough energy, enough nourishment to our heart as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Again, another key word I think is really vital that you just mentioned there was oxygen.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's so much more to that one element that we work with, and maybe this will tie around to the crystallization energy as well. But, in some ways, oxygen or the breath that we breathe is another crystallized form of an element. It's just in a different form. And it's as we inhale it, many times I have the experience of feeling that in breath, that out breath, as feeling the spirit, the life force energy flowing through. That in a lot of ways, our body in some ways could be mechanical, if you will. It does have the capability to exist with limited consciousness operating within it, and that a lot of the actualizing of the life within the body really does come from the breath. It is the one thing that we cannot live without. For I think, and I'm probably saying this totally backwards, but it's the, like, as far as certain things we can't live without, the oxygen and breathing is the number one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're talking minutes.
Exactly.
Anything less than a half an hour was probably not going to be life flowing through the body anymore. And then the next, I think after that is actually water.
Okay.
And then I think after
that's a lot longer. You can go quite a while
longer
without water. Yeah.
And then after that, I think would be sustenance for the body, something that creates fuel for the body. Yeah. But, that has always been something I've been very fascinated with, this idea of oxygen in the breath. Mm-hmm. And I want to flip this back to medical, kind of looking at it spiritual and physical, if you will, that oxygen is definitely one of the foundational practices with almost every culture or every kind of consciousness elevating practice world. Breath work.
True.
Yeah. Mindfulness of breath, following the breath, being mindful of the space in between the in breath and the out breath. But that also, I'd love even maybe some of your expertise in this, because I've been brought my awareness to that having enough oxygen in the body actually creates an environment within the body where parasites and disease can't really exist if we create enough oxygen flow through the body.
Wow. I haven't heard that. No, I don't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, and I just find this to be very profound, that there are, hyperbolic chambers and sorts of therapies like this, where it's about pumping massive concentrations of oxygen through the body, and that the studies of what it does to the cellular tissues that are out of balance. I'm going to say it that way, but say combating some sort of miasma within the cell.
Okay.
And that as the oxygen increases within there, the inverted energy, I don't want to say, any particular kind of disease or anything like that, but just that whatever is killing off the cells, choking the life force out of them, that can't survive in there anymore within the increase of the oxygen. And I think that also is just very key for the levels of when we aren't breathing. Just to tie this back to what you said, that whole ability to bring oxygen back into the heart to feel that love, that if we aren't oxygenating our entire body, we are also constricting ourselves, I feel, from allowing our higher consciousness to begin to evolve.
Mm-hmm. That's so fascinating. So John F. Barnes is the person that I studied fascia release from. And his belief is that our consciousness actually lives in our fascia, in our body, mainly because our fascia system is basically a fiber optic network that transmits light. And so when we talk about ourselves as being light beings, in order to bring more light into our body, we need to have the fascia open and healthy in order for that light to flow through, right? And so going back to the oxygen as well, when our fascia system is restricted, if we think about that sponge that's restricted, we can put all the oxygen and nutrients and we can take vitamins all day. But if the blood flow to those cells is being cut off, it's not actually going to get to those cells to begin with, right? So we need that combination of both. And I think with the breath work, what's brilliant about that too, is that we, in order to keep our fascia healthy and unrestricted, we need movement. Movement is one of the key components. And so when you're doing that deep breath work and we're moving the rib cage in and out and we're massaging, when I first started studying yoga, I couldn't really understand when people said, breathe down to your toes. I'm like, that doesn't make sense from a medical perspective. A deep breath doesn't mean that, anyways, we could go into the anatomy of that, but energetically speaking, and fascia, like now that I know more about fascia, is that when we take those deep breaths in and we create movement in our body, our body really is, everything's connected to each other through the fascia system. The fascia system is, it has no beginning and no end to it. It's continuous throughout the body. So I like to describe it like a spider web. And if you tug on one little end of the spider web, you can see the entire web moves. And it's the same thing in our body. When we breathe and our ribs expand, the entire fascia system is getting movement. And so that's what we need in order to assist. I think it's interesting because I think there's a pairing there between what you said about getting oxygen flowing through the body and that movement by doing the deep breath work that helps to nourish that fascia system as well. That's cool.
Just a profound thought that just keeps lining up, because I love how when we talk about the body, it really is easily transferable to how we would talk about allowing our expansion of consciousness, our evolution of our spiritual adulthood is what I like to kind of refer to.
I love that. I really love that. I often think, just a quick side note, that we're like teenagers on this earth right now as a humanity. Like we're still learning to evolve our maturity in that way. But
I completely relate to that kind of perspective within there, because I think, again, we do still have, although you are a little kinder, I tend to go towards toddler.
I just see us as teenagers, like we're partying and we're throwing garbage everywhere. And there's just that endless seeking of pleasure. But that's interesting. You go younger.
Love it. Well, and interestingly enough, the toddler brain and the teenage brain are actually at very similar developmental stages.
Oh, interesting.
I learned this through when my kids were going through Montessori school for a little bit of time, that, you know, there's a model within there of like certain times where the mind or the brain is more pliable.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also when it tends to start to rebel a little bit more. It's just kind of all over again. And, you know, in some ways I do see us as a species, as a human species upon the planet, that we still really are within this me or mine. It's my toy. It's my thing. I have what I want. You know, it's about my spiritual path. It's about my evolution. It's about, you know, and we tend to have this kind of that energy within there. And I even see my hands kind of like tightening up, where, you know, as we begin to start to connect to those places where we might be protecting ourselves, where we might be seeing how, you know, well, I have my house in order. You know, it's like, well, how's the neighborhood? Well, I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about how is my house in order, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's going to be duality in there. And this is where we get to kind of look at things from a very neutral perspective. That in truth, at first, we do need to come from this individualized perspective, because this is something I personally say when I'm working with someone, is that all of the changes that one will create, even for all of the good that one can be for the earth as one's soul's purpose, starts inside.
Mm-hmm.
So we do kind of have to come inward to me or mine in a little bit of a way in order to start to go like, where is my restrictions? Where am I feeling held back, limited, fearful, all of these things? Where do I feel as though I have to be protective, or maybe put walls around the heart, or keep things locked away? And that when we start to work with that energy, you know, that this is where that starts to soften.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where that softening is. Again, it's like the nutrients, it's like the love, it's like the spirit can start to now enter into those places that have been blocked. Whereas now we get to go, okay, well, yes, I can have discernment. I can be a sovereign being. But the more and more we start to learn to open our heart through this love, the more we can actually start to let our perspective flow out into our home and then to the world around us. So it is really a path of coming inward, and in order to come back outward again, in order to have that level of compassion within there. And I think that is truly, at least from my perspective, the path of becoming a spiritual adult, is cleaning our own home first, cleaning our own internal closets first, so that as we walk, we truly can walk with open heart and transparency. And that, I feel, is truly that path of the spiritual adult.
I really love this, because as we speak about, you know, spiritual maturity, when we're doing our healing work, it's so important to meet ourselves where we're at on our path. And if we think of, you know, just human development, you know, children do need, like a 3-year-old isn't thinking about the collective, they're thinking about me and mine. And so when we do our healing work spiritually, there is steps that we need to go through. And I think it's important that we do that and not bypass that to this is what spiritual, because I think this is where we've maybe gone wrong in the past, or not gone wrong, everything happens for a reason, but where we can make some course corrections is that when we bypass our development, just seeking just to live from that spiritual perspective, we may be doing the actions out in the world. Like you might be going into your neighborhood and cleaning up the neighborhood and helping all your neighbors, but you're still holding on to this vibration in yourself of all those things that you haven't healed. And so those vibrations, you're still emanating out into the world. And I think the purpose of going back to that me and mine and getting good within ourselves first is that the clearer of a channel you are, the vibrations that you have healed within yourself is just so important, because once you heal a vibration in yourself and you elevate it, that vibration's not just healed for yourself, it's healed for the collective as well. And so it's like we start to move up in our vibration and to help to elevate and expand that consciousness, right? So just from my own experience in doing healing work for myself, there's been times where I've been guided, if I've had, like been having maybe a difficulty in a relationship or something like that. And I was told, like, just have compassion, see what they're going through. And it was never that I didn't have compassion for them or the other person. But when we just shift out of healing ourselves to take care of others and make sure others are okay, I think this can be a road that we go down as empaths, is that we get so tuned into everybody else around us and taking care of everybody else, that even as healers, sometimes we can get in that path of, well, just think of the other person, think of what they're going through, change your perspective, see it from their point of view. We have to heal that inner child, that 3-year-old that is still within us, before we can expand and open up to have that compassion for others and to see the other's perspective. So I think it is so important not to just bypass everything that we're holding on inside of us in favor of a spiritual perspective, because it's very easy to intellectualize the spiritual perspective and to align your actions with the spiritual perspective in the world. But if you're still holding on to that pain inside of you, if you've bypassed it, if you haven't looked within, you're still carrying that vibration for the collective too, right? So I think it's important to do both.
Vitally important. It is from definitely, again, I can only give my perspective, but I feel it's vitally important. You touch on something amazing, because I actually believe there's a term for it, that it's referred to as spiritual bypassing. Where, it's like, no, forget it. I'm not of this world. This is really a starseed light worker or spiritual, or, even a religious perspective can kind of take this, where it's like, oh, well, I'm not of this world. I am not of this body. I am not of this reality. I'm here to do the higher work, and then I'm out of here. I'm never coming back again, right? It's like, I don't belong to this reality. I don't belong to this world. And, here's the thing. I recognize even that conversation that I've had within myself at shadow times, moments where I still hadn't faced some of the shadow, that really is stemming from a lot of the pain from earlier times. And there's so many different rabbit holes that we could go down through this, but that, a lot of times there is this idea of like, I just want to rise above all of the things that have hurt me so much, and I'm going to exist over here and not pay attention to any of this. Now, I will say, in many of the esoteric practices, this is literally the opposite of the evolutionary path. This is literally, absolutely the opposite of what the teachings, and whether you look at this from Taoist, from Zen, from Zoroastrian, if you look at this from Essene teachings, from Christic path teachings, from Blu-ray teachings, Law of One teachings, if you look at this from the mystery schools, Pythagoras, if you look at this through the Isis schools, the Hathor teachings, any of these, let's just cut to the chase of what the very first step is before they let you in the temple doors. And the words written over the temple doors say, know thyself. The oracles of Delphi, if you look at the temples, it's inscribed in so many temples, and in the top it says, know thyself. And before even, I'll just use Pythagoras for an example. He was an incredible Capellan and Blu-ray starseed. quite out there in the way that he shared things, but amazing with the sacred geometries and the sacred connections, and why it's important to have integrity in every lifetime. Don't skirt a single thing you're doing in this lifetime, because you are eternal. That's like the basis of a lot of his wisdom teachings. And before you would even be allowed, you had to learn how to overcome the lower desires of the body.
Mm-hmm.
Purification processes. And it wasn't about, oh, are you mentally strong enough? Can you do it? Can you take on this challenge? No. The whole point about it was knowing that whenever we're operating from those lower bodies, is what they referred to them, because when we think of, say, the 5 subtle bodies, even when we're operating from the lower bodies, we're literally being run by the chemistry, the parasites, the bacteria, the food we've eaten, our shadows, our hurts, our traumas, our bound fascia in our body. All of those project emotions, and then the way those emotions then project onto our way we think or perceive the world around us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was very, very understood that if you hadn't learned how to clean out your temple yet, and they did, and they started with, like, say, usually fasting or certain very specific things, but if you didn't learn how to have mastery over being mindful of every thought and feeling that was moving through, and becoming mindful enough to realize it wasn't you, it's something moving through you, you would never be allowed into the next levels.
That's beautiful.
I think it's very, very powerful to kind of understand. And I will actually, I apologize. I'm not saying this to make offense or bring up anything. It's just a perspective that is out there. But there are, even within the Steiner teachings, and some of the later Rosicrucian, in the ways that they were put through, again, I'm not promoting any of that, but there was a perspective about the middle path. So it really ties into a lot of different other teachings. But this idea of the middle path, when you look at the Kathara tree of life, when you look at a lot of the Buddhist teachings, everything in some of these higher esoteric wisdoms really comes back to walking this middle path, which starts to step out of this idea of polarity. And that from their perspective, that there wasn't just two ways, there was 3. And they referred to either one being the path that, most primarily people would be like, oh, well, I'm doing what is good, or what is, and then if I'm not doing what is good, then I'm doing something that is bad. So we have these 2 perspectives, or good or bad. But that there was an understanding of many of the other subtle realms of which we're connected to, that we're not just our consciousness in this material realm, and then we have imaginations of angelic realms or Davic realms or elemental realms or other race lines and so on, that there truly is a way to connect. And they and this goes across many different spiritualized teachings, the awareness of, say, many subgroups of, say, angels or different types of beings. So there was considered a 3rd path, and it was considered the Luciferic path. And it wasn't, and these beings weren't considered good or bad. This is, not in the same term of where that word has maybe been construed or twisted in today's mind frame. But that really these beings were very high esoteric beings that had a very high wisdom towards the light, towards source, towards the mechanics of the universe. But from their perspective, all of their perspective was all about spirituality. That to them, the real realm was the realms of light, and the real realms were the realms of beyond the material realm. And so they really gave no credence to the physical or the material reality. And then within that, what started to happen was an incredible disconnect. So therefore, there is now a disrespect towards a massive component
Mm-hmm.
of source.
I love this conversation, Becca, because I've been reflecting so much on this lately. And I think it talks to going from that 3D perspective to the 5D perspective and this path that we're taking to elevate our consciousness. And, how I have started to come to see this, or what keeps coming through for me, is that where we're getting stuck is that we're still living in separation, where as light workers, maybe the conversation has been around rejecting the dark in favor of the path, or in favor of the light, sorry. And that's how we create separation within ourselves, is when we go out to be a spiritual being and we reject the human body, we're still living in separation. And I think the whole purpose of what we're going through right now is to cure this separation, to bring us back into wholeness and bring us back into alignment. And so anytime we reject a part of ourselves, if we reject our shadows, or we reject our human desires, or if we reject what we would label as bad or not good in favor of the light, we're still living in separation. So when you talk about that third option, we have the light and the dark. The third option is that we have both, and that there's purpose in both, and that we need to honor that both exist in this world, because we wouldn't know the light unless we knew the dark, and we wouldn't know the dark unless we knew the light. We need that reflection of the two on each other in order to live in this reality that we live in, right? And so often we'll label the dark or something as bad, but we often don't see that that is the path to enlightenment, is having both of these energies exist in the world, right? I think what happens as we start to heal and grow our consciousness is that they start to elevate, right? So maybe the dark isn't as dark as we elevate more, or maybe they get more separate. I don't know. That's what I don't know yet, is if we go more to the light, that we get more dark as well. But I do think the path forward, and I think where we're getting stuck maybe right now, is that there's lots that's coming up, more truths being told in the world, more of the dark shadows that we have been ignoring coming forward to be seen. I think the shadows are only going to come up to the ability that we can hold love for them. And I think that is the key. That third part that you're talking about is just love for all of it. And can we love our shadows? Can we love our humanity? Can we see purpose in what we would label as bad as actually being in service to the good? And that these polarities are here to work together, not in separation from one another. And so if we can see them as working together, so if we take our own shadows, our own humanity as an example, you're talking about when, as spiritual beings, we've been taught to not be of the body and to ignore our humanity. But if the purpose is to help humanity evolve, we need to get our spirit into the body so our body can be the spiritual human, right? So if we're living in separation, spirit's up here, the body's down here, we've rejected our humanity, what we're labeling as bad isn't getting healed, right? So we just have this unhealed body and this spirit that's living up here, and we need to merge the two together so that we can heal what we need to heal as a humanity in order to move forward.
I absolutely resonate with that. And, when we talk about the polarity, I think automatically, because of our human belief systems that we've been taught, that we automatically think of polarity as good or bad. Right? If there's a polarity, then it must be good or bad. But the physics, the mechanics of this world we live in is based on polarity. Mm-hmm. The positive, negative charges within the electromagnetic fields of our body. Our entire body is a magnificent chemistry set. That if your salts are off, then certain things can absorb certain things, which means then if your salts are off, then the electrical flow can't send the signals to the other parts of your body. And so, of course, then the fiber optics of the fascia aren't going to function. And so all of that is a dance of polarity. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I love about human design is that when you look at the body wave graph, you actually see your own circuitry in action. And you get to start to see where, when you move about in life, how you kind of create these perfect dances of connecting and disconnecting and then reconnecting and then disconnecting, and this dance of moving just like communication cells in the body. And so, I think there is an evolution into how we can begin to work within polarity. And that part of that is really starting to have a respect for this incredible divine vehicle. This vehicle is just not some accidental thing that tripped into creation at all. It is so complex. It is so interwoven from so many levels of geometry and consciousness. This body alone is a living library. And, again, I think part of the distortion that we have has been taught to us. We haven't been taught how to process our emotions. We haven't been taught how to handle big T's and little T's in our life. And so, again, we shove and lock away a lot of these things. And I want to even just kind of give a illustration of spiritual bypassing. Spiritual bypassing on one level could be just going off into like living, say, oh, well, the only thing that matters is, my soul, my spirit, and where I'm going. And so this world doesn't matter. And so we could become so involved in that reality that we don't focus on, say, taking care of the body, moving the body. We don't focus on its health. We don't focus on our job, paying the bills on time, being a part of the co-creation of this world and of this. And so therefore, in a lot of ways, spiritual bypassing actually starts to put a lot of your responsibility on other people. Survival, right? I'm going to give a flip side of this too, because I think spiritual bypassing, we could look at it from even a how would I even say this? Let's just say, well, let's look at it from a different consciousness perspective. And say that, we've been hurt, we've been traumatized, and we see this in ourselves and a lot of others. It's like, well, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to look about it. Well, my life is fine now. I don't want to go dig that up. I don't want to touch that topic anymore. And you can tell the moment that even starts to come up a bit of emotion. And it's immediately like, put the padlocks back down, put the boulders back on top of that. No, it's like, why do I want to revisit that? I feel a lot of individuals take a spiritualized path with the same perspective, where it's like, well, I don't want to pay attention to any of this material realm because I think it's stupid. I think it's irrelevant. I don't think it matters. I just think, it's an illusion. It's a Maya. It doesn't really exist.
And that's separation again, right? That's creating, I'm
This
over
is
here,
real.
over there.
Yeah.
It's not whole. Yeah.
This is a manifested reality that has been dreamed into creation.
It's so interesting you're saying this, because I've been watching some other videos on things lately, and I just woke up this morning being like, every morning we wake up in this magical realm and we don't even acknowledge how much magic exists here and how much we can create and the beauty, and just, it's insane that we're even here. Like, what is here? It's just, there's just such a, oh man. And the other thing that was coming up for me as you were speaking about that, Becca, was like, more and more and more, I start to feel into the fact that my body is the earth. Like, my body is I wouldn't have a body if it wasn't for the earth. My body is everything that came from the earth. And so when we separate ourselves again, that the body doesn't matter, are we then saying that the earth doesn't matter, and that the consciousness of this earth that we're living on and the reason that we actually get to be here doesn't matter? And like, how much of that talks to the separation between spirit and nature as well. I think a little bit. That's kind of what was coming up for me as you were saying that.
I definitely also resonate with that. And I think that could almost be like a whole other magnificent deep dive, because I really do feel that a lot of what we carry is a lot of the pain, the traumas, and the wounds that this divine earth mother has handed us, and that we get to be a gift to allow that transmutation to come through us, that we truly are the consciousness that steps into the body, that merges with it, that then through our own transformation with our consciousness, really our perception of how we view this reality, and then how we redream this reality. Because this is one thing I like to say: if you don't like the way the dream is, dream a new one.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't like somebody else's dream, most of the times all we do is sit around and grumble about things because we don't like it, but people for the most part don't want to get up and do anything about it. Well, this is your reality. This is, this is kind of one of the perspectives I have. It's like, if I don't like my day or my life or what I have around me, I only got me to blame for that. And regardless of whatever big T's and little T's I went through in earlier years of my life, and don't worry, I got my own barrels full of them. But it's, again, how do I perceive them? And am I going to let those be the thing that I look to prove why my reality is horrible? Or am I going to look to them as the treasures that allowed me to actually have multiple perspectives of this reality, so that I can begin to recreate a new dream from that? And then again, that's that transmutation that we do through our genome, our very sequences and our cellular memories. We process out, we allow that to detoxify out of the body. So now we're healing the earth, we're healing it off of the grids of consciousness, and we're healing it out of our own body, that by us allowing more love in. And one thing I just want to say, and this is, this is something that it keeps coming back as a validation, is that we haven't even tapped into the magnificence of what it is to be in this body. Most of us barely know how to just keep it alive. And even at that, it's still slowly dying. So within that, we haven't even learned how to get it to bilocate yet, to, materialize, dematerialize, rematerialize again, and there are just magnificent beings on this planet. There's an individual, I think his name is Dynamo Jack, that used to do some videos, but I mean, we can also think of, say, a lot of the Tibetan meditators, that their initiations, before they can get into certain next levels of learnings in certain monasteries, that they have to sit outside of these monasteries, way up in some gosh darn cold places, strip their clothes off and sit there. And how much mastery they have created by merging with this physical body is reflected by how big of a radius of melted snow that they could create around just their intentions of radiating heat from their body. And then we see individuals like Wim Hof and other individuals who are just examples for the absolute, magic that this body can be if we choose to align our consciousness with its capabilities and to move it through our consciousness. So I think a lot of times when we demoralize the body, it's because we haven't actually taken the time to begin to recognize its magnificence. And, I just will say, even in the esoteric teachings, and especially within, say, the working with the 5 subtle bodies, whichever way you want to look at it, that it's all about bringing the higher bodies of consciousness into the lower body, so that in essence you were existing simultaneously, equally in all 5 bodies. and that was the absolute key for keeping your consciousness intact.
Mhm.
Your soul or your spirit eventually transcended out of the body at the death process.
Beautiful. Yeah. Man, it really is. It's a path of going from being disempowered to empowered. I like that's kind of what I'm hearing you say as you talk about that. And I think we've been so conditioned to not be in our power for so many different reasons. Often I hear this language of, well, you're just being a victim, you're just being a victim. And I think what is important to talk about is that somebody who's coming from victim consciousness is just hasn't learned how to be in their power. And, sometimes I think people get shamed for not being in their power. But there, again, it's a protective mechanism, right? That we're unconsciously putting out into the world. And I think when we take this path of learning when we can recognize that we're not in our power, and this has been one of my greatest paths, is learning how to come into my power. And I'm still working on that. But going from this place of disempowerment and taking those steps of initiation in order to be in our power, it's like we were talking about before, you have to heal those wounds. Like, this is why we go back. You were talking about why do we even go back, and why would we choose to ignore those traumas and just be of the spiritual world? In a way, it feels better, right? It feels better not to feel all the feels, but we're missing big opportunities for healing. And I think, emotionally speaking, for many of us, we just don't know we don't know what to do with our emotions. We've been taught to shame them, to be embarrassed of them, to, emotional expression, especially coming from maybe a more European background. Emotions, we don't do emotions, right? In a lot of ways. And so we've been shamed out of them. So we're not letting that energy flow. And as much as we want to turn away and not look at our past traumas, they still start to show up in our life, right? You can't live a fulfilled life if you haven't healed those parts, because they're always going to be causing blocks in your life. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that actually touches in, and I would just be curious, it's like, again, we can start to acknowledge. I think mindfulness is one of the great tools in order to start to catch these types of things within there. But, when we start to get to pay attention to these stuck places that are within ourselves, and I want to give just an acknowledgement to Nathan Simmons when he shared a conversation at one time. He said something that just really just popped something open. I just heard it from him, and it helped me illuminate it in all the other ways I've maybe heard this. But that is that whenever we lock those places away where we felt disempowered, or where we have just kind of hid, from the big T's and the little T's in our life, fragmented soul aspects, the wounded inner child parts, all of these times when we've shut away a part of ourselves. You used a beautiful example earlier of, say, a child is coloring on the wall, and then all of a sudden they just immediately get reprimanded. And it's like, potentially that locked something away in that child. But what it also locks away is the gift. And that's one of the things he said, is that all of these shadow places within, that wherever we begin to find them and unlock them, we also begin to unlock the treasures and the gifts that they hold for us. So it's really not, I don't think, a lot of times I think people just think, oh man, I don't want to do it. It's uncomfortable. It's painful. It's just like, it's too much work. I'm getting along just fine. I just ignore it and it's fine. But really, I personally think it can actually be a little bit addictive to get in there and get into these places. And yes, at first it's scary. Yes, it can be incredibly painful. Yes, I've cried so much. But it's temporary. And what unlocks and releases from that is more empowerment, love, compassion, softness, peace, being comfortable in our body, being comfortable in our skin, being comfortable with who we are, rediscovering ourselves, maybe rediscovering our artistic abilities that were shut down at that earlier age. Or one of the number one things I think for most individuals that have been shut down is the throat chakra.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, Becca, I just love that reframe so much, that we're not digging for the shadows and the hurts and the pains, that we're actually digging for the gems that got covered up in there. Like, that's beautiful. Like, what a beautiful reframe. And I think it's important to mention too, that as you do this work, we need safety to do the work. And so you have to find the right practitioner to work with, to help you to have a safe space. And it might not even be a practitioner. It might just be a friend who's really a safe person to talk with. Because what we learn in Hakomi is that when there is safety, and when we go to these places with mindfulness, with compassion, and just pure curiosity, what's the gem that's there, right? Like, what got locked down in me? What is the godlike part of me that is wanting to come through and express itself in this world? When you say know thyself, we're each an individual expression of the dream that the creator is having for us. And so to find those gems and to be the full expression of the light beings that we are, I just love that. Just totally resonated with me when you said that. I'll have to touch base with Nathan about that one. Thank you for sharing that. That was great. I love that.
Absolutely.
Because why do we, if we take it back even to the beginning, why do we do this work? So that God can be more of God here on earth in this human body. Why would we reject something that's been created?
Oh, I just feel the emotion in that, because I can just feel that so much with nature, with the earth, with everything, that I really feel what a lot of us strive for, hunger for, is that reconnection again, to find the sacredness in life, to find the sacredness in connection, not only with others, but with all kingdoms, the animal kingdoms, the plant kingdoms, the mineral kingdoms, to really just feel that sacredness of life again. And I feel in such an impassioned way that is what so many of us doing this work are really doing. That it doesn't have to be a career or what you're doing, just you having a willingness to love yourself more, welcome yourself more into your heart, come more into your body. You are doing that. You are literally coming more into a state of co-connection and reconnection with the earth, with living life energy, and I think that's just so much of it, that we're having the permission to be vulnerable and to be loving with each other again.
We've been so disconnected for so long. Yeah.
Much.
Oh, I'm just like reveling in the feels right now. It's so beautiful being here with you and having this conversation. And I do believe, we think that we have to die to go to heaven, and we have the ability to create heaven on earth. Like, we truly do. Like, what other beautiful places are there? I'm sure there's lots of places in the universe that we can go and visit, but I mean, just the spark, like when I was driving down the California coast, just the sparkle of the water was just like, there's just so much beauty that's here to be appreciated. And we are it. Like, we are nature. We are this beauty. Can we fall in love with ourselves and with each other, and appreciate each other as much as we appreciate a sunset or a tree or
I think that is like perfectly said. That it really is about finding that place that you would yearn to be. It's like can you actually find it here, live it here, be it here?
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. There are so many things that I think the more we soften to that perception of that beauty around us, the more we actually start to see that it's absolutely everywhere. And that this beautiful work like Hakomi, work like whatever one is drawn to, you know, whether it's yoga, myofascial work, going into the shadows, finding someone to help with getting in there and beginning to find those places that are just seeking love.
Mm-hmm.
The more we soften all of that, the more that our hearts, like you said with the breath, has more room to breathe, more room to receive that love.
Mm-hmm. The darkness wants to be loved too. I think that's what we forget. It all wants to be loved. That's that third point.
Oh,
We
I
have so many
love
words,
so
Becca. We've
much.
come to a place where we have words no more.
And this is such a perfect place, honey. This has been such an amazing conversation with
Oh,
you.
oh my gosh. I appreciate you so much, Becca. I'm so glad that our paths have crossed and that we've had this connection, and we'll have to do this again.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So much love to everyone for sharing this conversation with us. We look forward to sharing so many more of these. And if you ever feel as though you want to reach out to either of us, our websites will be linked underneath the video. So much love. Let your heart open to more love. Thank you.
Love it. All right.